Hello and welcome into a socially distanced production of School Talk here at the WJHI studios on August the 19th. I am Clay Abels, and with me today is the Superintendent of Greater Clark County Schools, Mr. Mark Laughner. How are we doing today, sir?
Great, thank you.
It's great to have you in here, and usually we start off and go straight into our facility plans and talking about COVID and all the details and issues of Greater Clark County Schools, but today we're going to start with a little bit of a somber moment. Over last week we lost Jim Sexton, who is the former principal at Jeffersonville High School. He served the Kentuckiana community in education for over 40 years, an instrumental part in starting our WJHI program. He was 78 years old. Mr. Laughner, I was going to ask you, I know you've worked with Mr. Sexton in the past. What are some of your thoughts or memories and the mark that he left on Greater Clark County Schools?
Well, first I'll tell you he was a good man just to sit and talk with. He had an immense amount of experience in the educational world. I always sat next to him during the principal meetings that we had each month, and so he was just great to talk to. What I remember about him is, as a leader, educational leader, he had very high standards for what he wanted to accomplish in a building, and he had high expectations for every student and staff member in his building. So, that's the thing I'll remember about him, and just our conversations. He was a funny guy, even though he came across as pretty tough, but he was a funny guy and fun to be around.
I think it's definitely appropriate you have the suit and tie on, because I know we've talked about his biggest thing, dress for success.
That's
so
right.
Always hammered that home. Even you talked about before, if you're a substitute teacher, you better wear a tie.
Yep.
Always leading the way in that category. So we want to share our thoughts and prayers with the Sexton family as we transition into our episode of School Talk today. We're going to start off with the topic of COVID and quarantine. I know it's certainly been an issue that we're still dealing with as the school year starts. We've gone to mask policy, obviously, in the school, having to wear your mask every day and on the bus. Talk about latest protocols. Has there been any changes since last week or anything different with quarantine or mask or anything in the COVID area?
Well, and I will tell you, one of the reasons we made that adjustment to masks is it allows students to shorten the quarantine from 14 days to either 10 or 8. So now, if all students are masked up, they can shorten the quarantine at day 10, come back on day 11, as long as they're not showing symptoms and they wear a mask and they stay 6 feet apart from everybody else, especially during lunch and those common areas. The other way that they could shorten a quarantine is go get a PCR test on day 5, 6, or 7. If it's a negative PCR test, then they could return on day 8. And of course, if they're not showing symptoms. So, for all of our students wearing masks now allows us to do that. And our goal is to make sure our kids are in school, getting educated. We don't want them home on quarantine unless we absolutely have to. And so we felt like this was a necessary modification, to what we wanted to do with the quarantining policy. And we feel like, our students will follow it, our parents will follow it. But that's two different ways that students could shorten their quarantine from 14 days down to 10 or 8.
So that segues us perfectly to our student question this week from one of our students, Lily Fondrisi with WJHI. The question comes in is, if a student, and particularly a student athlete, is quarantined, can they come back early if they have a negative test result? What's the process there? Once you're quarantined and you have a negative test result, does that adjust your timeline at all?
Yes, as long as they're not showing symptoms, they haven't tested positive, and they go and get a PCR test on day 5, 6, or 7, and it's negative, then they could return on day 8, but they have to wear a mask at all times. Even during lunch, obviously they're going to eat during lunch, but they need to be 6 feet away from everybody else and have the mask on at all times, right after they eat. So, that is very possible, whether it's a student athlete or a student, just wants to come to school. To do that PCR test on day 5, 6, or 7, and if it's negative and no symptoms, then come back on day 8.
How much of the challenge for you as a superintendent and your administrative cabinet has changed from last year? I know we had to deal with staffing and making sure everybody was here and trying to keep quarantines down and COVID numbers down. This year it seems more the issue for you guys is the students and making sure they don't test positive. How much of that has changed? Because it's not the same issue as last year. I know we've talked a little about this before, but how does that change your responsibility? It's not the same problems that you dealt with a year ago.
Well, it has actually taken even more of our time in dealing with COVID, especially our principals, our school nurses, our health assistants. I mean, they're spending almost all day long contact tracing, quarantining, trying to track down kids that were within 3 feet, and calling parents, and so that's what we're finding this year because of the great number of students that have had to be quarantined. We're having a hard time getting that focus back on just running school and academics. It's really a difficult situation for our school leaders in terms of our principals, health assistants, and nurses, because like I said, they're spending pretty much all day long just contact tracing and making phone calls to parents. And we feel that at the admin building level also, because obviously when a child gets quarantined, parents have questions, they're upset, they want to talk to somebody at the administration building. We tell them we're following the CDC guidelines. Even these new quarantine policies are part of the CDC guidelines. We just didn't make these up. They're part of the CDC guidelines that we're following.
For you, now that the mask policy has been instilled, have you seen any positive results in terms of numbers slowing down a little bit, or as you mentioned before, having the distance with the mask policy, you can come back earlier on quarantine? How has that helped in the last couple of weeks, making the mask mandate?
Well, we're still collecting data. One thing I see is that we are quarantining less kids. One of the other things I think the masks are helping. I also think at some point all the professionals, in terms of health experts, say that this COVID Delta variant will plateau or peak, and it will start going back down a little bit, or hopefully a lot. And I think that could be happening too, from the standpoint, but what we're seeing right now is the last 2-3 days, less quarantining, fewer positive cases. Hopefully we can, hopefully this variant has peaked and we can sort of get back to as normal as we can possibly be during a pandemic.
One of the ways to help negate COVID and help fight against it, certainly the vaccine and doing appropriate testing. I know you all have opened up the Fetter Center in Jeffersonville here for testing and for vaccine use. What's the process if you want to get a COVID test, or if you're looking to get a vaccine for your child or yourself? What's the process to go down to the Fetter Center and help yourself in that area?
Yeah, the state health department, because Clark County was considered a hot spot, asked if they could use the Fetter Center parking lot to do testing and vaccination. So obviously we want to do all that, make sure that happened. We'd like to see more, students 12 and older and parents get vaccinated so that we can, get out of this situation we're in terms of all the quarantine. And frankly, all you have to do is drive down there. I was down there twice yesterday, and there were probably 30, 40 cars backed up all the way to 10th Street, lined up, ready to go in and get tested or get vaccinated. So each day that they've had it, and I've been down there, there's been a ton of people lined up there to get tested and vaccinated. So, and most of them have just showed up and they get them in line and take care of them.
Here on School Talk from the WJHI studios with our socially distanced production with Mr. Laughner, Superintendent of Greater Clark County Schools. I want to transition now from COVID to the topic of substitute teachers. I know that's been a very difficult scenario for all school systems across the country. Let's start with the challenge. What has been the challenge with COVID in getting substitute teachers for you as a superintendent?
Well, we're in an unprecedented labor shortage, and it affects schools the same it affects restaurants, manufacturing businesses in River Ridge. We've been short. We were short on substitute teachers last year. We're short again this year because typically your substitute teacher population are a little older, and they have a big concern about coming into schools to substitute teach, especially if they haven't been vaccinated. And so we're dealing with that just like every other organization out there. And custodians. I mean, we're also fighting that a little bit, in terms of hiring, finding custodians. Whether it be, some people say it's because of the unemployment benefits and people aren't ready to go back to work because they're still receiving unemployment benefits. Part of it's the COVID issue. Part of it is just a labor shortage, and we're competing with other companies to hire these people. So, but it is real. I've talked to other superintendents throughout the state. It's not just here in Greater Clark. Other school districts throughout the state are short on bus drivers, short on custodians, short on subs. We're all facing the same problems.
For you as a superintendent, tell the community or people in the working community, What are some of the offerings that make Greater Clark County Schools attractive for substitutes? If somebody's looking to be a substitute teacher, what makes this a great place to be if you're looking to be a sub?
Well, I think the environment and just how our principals and our leadership in the schools work with the subs that come in. I think they treat them, like a regular teacher and want them to be successful when they walk into a classroom. The pay, I will tell you, we need to improve our sub pay. I think that will help, and that's something we're looking at and working on. But I think, our schools are good schools. That substitute teachers, when they come in, they're not going to have a lot of problems. Typically the kids comply and conform to even what the substitute teacher wants them to do, and they have a good experience here, when they come into our schools. So it's a great place to work, and come into, and we just hope that more do it, and come in and help us out.
Last thing we'll talk about with substitute teachers is, I know even if you're a full-time teacher and have a planning period and you want to help out, I know there's some opportunities there if you're a teacher. If you want to pick up an extra period, that's also an option as well, correct?
Yes, that does happen. Not a lot, but sometimes, teachers are asked to do that, and we appreciate that because, that's an extra workload on the teacher that's doing that, and we're very thankful that our teachers are willing to do that.
Well, let's transition now. We'll talk about the facility plan. I believe we left off on year 3 last time we discussed. I know you've been dealing with community meetings all week. I believe today's your last day of community meetings. We've talked, the facility plan has been approved. I just wanted to go over here, starting with year 4 and year 5. We'll end it with, what are some of the highlights towards the end of this facility plan that people might want to keep an eye on? I know last time we talked about the upgrades at the football field with the lighting, the swimming pools at Jeffersonville, and also potentially new elementary schools in the plan. What are some of the finishing plans in year 4 and 5?
Yeah, 4 and 5. Year 4 is really a lot of district-wide stuff in terms of HVAC, paving, roofing type things, security, safety, in terms of cameras, access controls, those type things. Really, year 5 is the biggie because what we would like to do in year 5 of the plan is build a new Parkview Middle School. That building is 61 years old. It would probably take $25 million to renovate that building. You could build a new middle school for about 45 to 50. We would like to replace that building. That is what we would like to do. We feel like it needs it. There's a lot of issues there in terms of electrical, mechanical, plumbing that need to be dealt with. And so we hope the community will support that. Hopefully they'll support all the plan, but especially that because, I just really believe our students and staff, deserve to have nice facilities and nice learning environments, throughout the district, and that's what we're trying to accomplish.
When it's all said and done and the plan is completed, what is your goal? When it's all said and done, what do you think once these buildings and structures and renovations are complete, what do you think the bottom line finish will be, the benefit to Greater Clark County Schools?
Well, multiple. Number one, like I said, the learning environments for students and staff. We want that to be top notch, and it will be at that point if we get all this stuff done. The other thing is that the financial efficiencies you get from building new buildings versus old buildings. Old buildings are not financially efficient. They have a lot of work orders. The HVAC equipment's old, is not efficient. When you merge buildings or build new buildings, you're more efficient financially in the areas of transportation, food service, staffing, which allows you to save money as a district. You can then return that money to the classroom in the form of programs, equipment, staff pay, teacher pay, para pay, and that's what we're hoping to accomplish over the next 5 years. We want to be as lean and efficient financially as we possibly can so that we can direct as many financial resources to the classroom, to students and teachers as we possibly can.
The last thing I'll ask you today with the facility plan, I know today, August 19th, is your last meeting with the community. How have the first 2 meetings gone, and what do you hope to get out of the last meeting before you start the plan?
Well, we tried to send out as much information as we could to all students, staff, parents before these 3 community event meetings. And I think early on, the reports I'm receiving is the great majority of people are very supportive of our plan. And they like the fact that it's tax neutral, it's not going to increase the tax rate, yet we're going to get a whole lot of work done for our students and staff throughout the district. And so I just think it'll be a great thing for the community. And these community events, the turnout's been light, but they've had some really good questions. Now, I take that as, we've done a pretty good job of communicating what we want to do, and most people are supportive, so they don't have a lot of questions. We've tried to put that information out there pretty broadly. First night we were in New Washington, it was about 5 people. Last night it was about 10 to 12. Mainly they want to know about, just the bonding capacity of the district and the tax rate and the financial piece of it, because nobody wants their taxes to go up. And we feel that same way. We don't want to raise anybody's taxes with this plan. So we're answering those questions. We'll continue to answer those questions as they come in. We're committed to doing this work and committed to keeping that tax rate at $1.10 and not, we don't want to negatively impact anybody as far as the tax rate. And we feel like we can do that and get this work done. And that's a win-win for everybody. It's a win for the taxpayer because their taxes won't go up, and it's a win for our students and staff because they're going to get nicer facilities.
All right, lastly, Mr. Laughner, as we wrap up here, any message or notes to the community, parents, anything that's changed in the last week that you'd like to keep people abreast of?
No, just bear with us. We know this is, what I will tell parents, that are concerned about the start of the school year, when you plan for a new school year, you usually do that in May of the school year before. And what we planned for this year was somewhat of a normal start to the school year. Well, then, basically the week we started school was when the Delta variant hit, this area, and we started having numerous cases all over our district, and we had to modify things. We had to modify our back to school plan. We had to modify a lot of, little things. And, I hope parents will be patient, that we're trying to do the right things. We're trying to get it right. We're trying to make sure that our students have a safe experience, but also a fun, academic experience too. So just be patient. We're trying to work through any issues we see and make them right, and we will.
Well, we appreciate you coming in here, Mr. Laughner. I know you mentioned fun. Now that the fall sports schedule hopefully about to start. I know we had soccer here last night, so hopefully the enjoyment will start to come into the school system here in the next few weeks.
Yep, and that's a big part of the school experience, in terms of going to the football games on Friday night and basketball games, and I'm excited that that's going to get started here.
Well, we appreciate you coming in, sir.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
That is Mark Laughner, our superintendent of Greater Clark County Schools, with us today on August the 19th for School Talk from the WJHI studios. We thank Lily Fondrisi for her student-oriented question and for Mr. Laughner for coming in. You can rewatch this episode of School Talk on Cable 184, along with audio on 98.5 FM and streaming audio at WJHI.com, and also replayed on social media through WJHI on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Lily Fondrisi and Mark Laughner, I'm Clay Abel saying so long, and thank you for tuning in to School Talk on 98.5 WJHI LP Jeffersonville, home of the Red Devil Network.